I never thought I'd live to see the day when my own child would look at me the way strangers do, like a responsibility to pass off, like a weight too heavy to carry. My name is Lorraine. I'm 66 years old, and for most of my life I believed my daughter and I were inseparable. We survived everything together, the divorce, the long nights, the years when it was just the two of us against the world. When she was little, she used to climb into my lap and tell me, "Mama, when you get old, I'll take care of you the way you take care of me." I held on to those words like they were a promise carved in stone. But promises soften.
People change.
And the day she drove me to what she called a temporary place to rest, I realized I was stepping into a chapter of my life I never imagined, one built on quiet betrayal and a heartbreak deeper than age itself. I spent most of my life believing that love, real love, was something you proved with your hands, not just your words. Maybe that came from my own upbringing, or maybe it was because life didn't give me the luxury of leaning on anyone for long. Either way, when my daughter came into this world, I made myself one quiet promise. She would never feel the kind of loneliness I grew up with. Raising her in our tiny southern community wasn't always easy, but it felt purposeful. It felt like breathing. The kind of breathing you do when you're tired, but you keep going because someone depends on you. We lived in a little shotgun house with creaky floors and thin walls that didn't do much against winter wind, but it was ours. That house heard every version of me, exhausted, hopeful, scared, determined, and it witnessed every version of her too. From her first steps to the nights she fell asleep with her head on my lap after reading the same story 3 times. I worked long shifts at the local grocery store back then. Nothing fancy, just steady pay and honest work. Sometimes I'd get home so tired my knees would feel like glass, ready to crack. But the moment I walked through that door and heard her soft little voice call, "Mama, you home?" it was like the whole world softened. I'd forget the customers who yelled about the wrong price, the managers who never paid attention, the way my back screamed every time I lifted too many boxes. I'd forget all of it just to sit at that tiny wooden table and listen to her chatter about school, or the drawings she made, or how she wanted to be a dancer or a scientist or a chef depending on the day. We built our life in small pieces, late-night dinners of leftover chicken, school projects taped to the living room wall, quiet Sundays when we'd go walking down the dusty road just to talk about nothing in particular. None of it looked fancy from the outside, but to us it felt whole. There were nights, especially when she got sick or the bills came in thicker than usual, when I would hold her while she slept and whisper promises into her hair. Promises about the future. Promises that I would always be there, no matter what. She couldn't hear me, but I think some part of her absorbed those words anyway, because she'd hold on to me tighter, like she knew I was her anchor. As she got older, things stayed sweet between us. We had little traditions, movie nights with too much popcorn, Sunday pancakes even when money was tight, and birthday dinners where she'd insist on cooking for me even if the food came out a little burnt. And every time she blew out her candles, she'd look over at me with those big eyes and say, "Mama, one day when I grow up, I'm going to give you the world." I'd laugh and tell her she already had. Life moved like that for years. Just the two of us, weaving our days together, building something soft and steady. And I'll tell you the truth, there were times I thought I didn't need anything else. Times when I thought love like this was enough to carry us through whatever life threw our way. But love, it changes, doesn't it? Not always in big dramatic ways. Sometimes it shifts so quietly you don't even notice until you look back and realize something important slipped through your fingers. The first small crack came when she went off to college. I was proud, Lord knows I was proud, but I felt the edges of something I couldn't name. Not losing her, exactly, more like loosening my grip on the life we had shared for so long. She'd still call, but the calls got shorter. She'd still visit, but the visits grew rushed. She had new friends, new experiences, a whole new world that didn't revolve around me anymore. And that was natural, I told myself. That was how life was supposed to go. Kids grow up. Parents let go. I tried to believe it even when I hung up the phone some nights and felt that empty space settle behind my ribs. When she graduated and moved a couple hours away for a job, I celebrated her success with real joy. I bought balloons and made a cake and sent her photos, even though she couldn't make it home that weekend. She texted a smiley face and promised she'd visit soon. She did, eventually. But when she came home, it wasn't the same. I noticed it in little things. The way she'd scroll on her phone while I talked. The way she'd sigh when I asked too many questions about her job. The way she'd press her fingers against her temples when I asked if she was eating well or getting enough sleep. She didn't mean to hurt me. I know that. She was stressed, busy, overwhelmed, young, trying to build her life. I told myself those things over and over again, like a mantra meant to protect my heart. But every time she left, the house felt a little quieter, a little colder. I'd sit in the living room after she drove off, staring at the empty chair she'd been in just hours before, and I'd feel something inside me ache. Not quite sadness, not quite loneliness, just a small shift, like the beginning of a storm you can't see yet, but you can feel gathering in the air. Things changed even more when she got into a serious relationship. Suddenly her life was full of new plans, new routines, new priorities that didn't have much room for me. She still called, but the calls came when she was driving or cooking or half distracted. She didn't notice when I paused longer before answering. She didn't hear the way my voice grew softer, or how I started saying, "I'm fine," even when I wasn't. I didn't want to be the kind of parent who clings too tightly. I didn't want to make her feel guilty for growing up. But somewhere deep down, I missed being the center of someone's world. I missed being needed. When she brought her boyfriend home for the first time, I tried my hardest to make everything perfect. I cooked all her childhood favorites, cleaned the house until my back ached, and even wore the blue dress she gave me for Mother's Day years before. But the visit felt different. They sat close together on the couch, laughing about things I couldn't follow. She corrected me gently when I said his name wrong. She rolled her eyes when I asked how they met. She looked embarrassed when I pulled out the old photo albums. And I told myself it was okay, that this was part of life, that it was natural for her to drift a little. But sometimes, late at night, when the house got too quiet and the shadows stretched across the walls, I'd feel that ache again. That quiet fear, not of losing her love, but of becoming invisible in her life. So I held on to what I could. I stayed patient, stayed gentle, stayed supportive. I reminded myself that love isn't about being at the center. It's about being steady, even when things change. And I kept believing that no matter how far she drifted, she'd always circle back to me eventually. But life has a way of testing the parts of you that you think are strongest. And even the closest of bonds can be tested by the right pressure. The signs were there long before I realized what they meant. The unanswered texts, the canceled visits, the way she'd say, "Mama, I'm tired," whenever I asked for even the smallest moment of her time. I told myself she was just overwhelmed. I told myself she'd come around. I had no idea that the distance I felt was only the beginning, that the bond we built with love and late nights and shared dreams was about to be challenged in a way I never imagined. And I didn't know it yet, but those quiet cracks between us, they were leading me toward a path I never thought I'd have to walk. A path where the child I raised with everything in me would look at me not with love, but with something cold, something tired, something I couldn't name, but would one day feel deep enough to break me. And that's where the next part of my story begins. I don't know when the stiffness in my knee first started. Maybe it was after all those years on my feet at the grocery store, or maybe it was just age catching up with me in ways I didn't want to admit. But I remember the morning it truly changed something. I had gone out to get the mail, humming like I always do, when my foot caught the edge of the walkway. It wasn't even a real fall, just one of those awkward little stumbles where you feel silly afterward. But the twist in my knee was sharp enough to make me stop and grab the railing. I thought it would pass. I told myself it was nothing. I spent decades pushing through tiredness, pushing through aches, pushing through life's weight, so what was one little twinge? But by the next morning, it hurt to stand. And sitting didn't help much either. It was the kind of pain that stayed, followed, pressed itself into your bones like it was claiming space. Still, I didn't call my daughter right away. I didn't want to worry her. She was working long hours and trying to build her own life. She didn't need to hear her mama was hurting over something as small as a twisted knee. But after 2 days of limping around the house, nearly dropping a pot in the kitchen when my leg buckled, I finally called her and told her what had happened. I wasn't asking her for anything, not money, not help. I just wanted to hear her voice. Maybe a little comfort. Maybe a little concern. She sighed before she said anything. "Mom, why didn't you call sooner?" Her tone wasn't warm. It wasn't scared for me or wrapped in care. It sounded bothered, like I had interrupted something important. I paused, wondering if I heard it wrong. "I didn't want to worry you, baby," I said softly. "It's probably just a sprain." "Well, do you need me to come by?" she asked, but the question sounded more like an obligation than an offer. No, I told her quickly. "I'll be fine." And I meant it. At least I thought I did. But knee pain at 66 isn't the same as knee pain at 30. Every little thing, standing up, walking to the kitchen, getting out of bed, even those small acts felt heavier. Like life had shifted slightly, and I had to shift with it. A few days later, my daughter came over anyway, mostly because she was running errands nearby. She stood in my doorway with her coat still on, scanning the house like she expected to see chaos. When she saw me sitting in my recliner with my leg propped up, her eyebrows pinched together. "Mom," she said, "this is exactly why I tell you to be more careful." Her words weren't cruel, but they weren't kind either. They made me feel like a child being scolded for playing too rough outside. I forced a smile and told her I'd been icing it. She nodded, but didn't sit beside me like she used to. Instead, she hovered, arms crossed, asking questions that felt more like evaluations. "Did you call the doctor? What did they say? Are you taking anything? Did you fall because you weren't paying attention?" I answered quietly, reminding myself she was only worried, that she was tired, that she wasn't trying to make me feel small. But I felt small anyway. When she finally moved to sit on the far end of the couch, she kept glancing at her watch. She stayed maybe 20 minutes, then kissed my forehead with a distracted little "feel better" before heading out. After she left, the house felt emptier than it had in years. Over the weeks that followed, the stiffness lingered. Some days were better, some worse. But it wasn't just the knee. It was the way my daughter's tone started changing. Shorter calls, less patience, more sighing, more "Mom, can you just," or "Mom, didn't we already talk about that?" She stopped asking how I was. She started asking what I needed, as if everything I said now meant work for her. I tried not to lean on her too much. I forced myself to take shorter steps, to keep fixing my own meals even when the ache flared, to stretch my budget to call a neighbor's son to help with groceries instead of asking her. I didn't want her to worry, and I definitely didn't want her to feel burdened. But one afternoon, everything changed. She had stopped by to drop off a bag of groceries, since she happened to be in the area again. I could feel the irritation on her before she even walked inside, her shoulders tight, her voice clipped, the kind of mood where you know one wrong word will set something off. I tried to make her comfortable. I offered her tea, asked about her job, complimented her new hairstyle. But she kept glancing at her phone, barely responding. When she got up to leave, I stood a little too fast and winced. My knee buckled slightly, just enough for me to grab the back of the chair. She reached out to steady me, but her face twisted, annoyed, not concerned. "Mom," she said sharply, "you're getting worse." The tone hit me harder than the pain. "I'm okay," I whispered, trying to smile. "Just moved too quickly." She shook her head and let out a heavy sigh. "You're too much sometimes. I can't keep doing this." Too much. I felt the words in my stomach first. Sharp, cold, settling deep. She had said it without thinking, but sometimes the most painful things come out exactly that way. Unfiltered. Honest. Raw. I looked at her, and for a moment, she looked back with something that wasn't anger, it was frustration. Overwhelmed frustration. Like my existence, my needs, my aging body were suddenly weight she didn't want to carry. She realized what she said almost instantly, but instead of apologizing, she rubbed her forehead and muttered, "I didn't mean it like that. I'm just tired." I nodded. I know, but I did feel like too much. Too heavy. Too slow. Too dependent. She walked out a few minutes later, leaving the groceries on the counter, and I stood alone in the quiet that followed, letting those two words settle around me like dust. Too much. After she left, I sat on the edge of my bed and cried softly. Quiet tears, the kind you let fall because holding them in hurts more. It wasn't the first time life made me cry, but it was the first time my daughter had. I didn't want to believe she meant it. I told myself it was stress, that she had a lot going on, that she didn't understand how deeply words like that cut when they came from your own child. I tried to be forgiving. I told myself she would calm down and things would return to normal. But things didn't go back to normal. Not really. Little moments became reminders of the shift between us. When I asked if she could help pick up a prescription, she hesitated before agreeing. When I mentioned I might need help moving a few boxes, she said she'd see if she had time. When I called her just to talk, she rushed through the conversation, saying she had things to do. And every sigh felt heavier than the last. The warmth that used to fill our conversations had thinned, replaced by a subtle edge. She started talking to me like I was someone asking for too much. Someone who required patience she didn't have. Someone who turned her life into inconvenience when she was already stretched thin. Maybe she didn't realize how her tone changed. Maybe she was stressed at work or arguing with her boyfriend or overwhelmed by life. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was standing on the outside of my own child's heart. One evening, after she cut a call short, I sat alone in my living room with the lamp casting that soft golden glow I've always loved. I watched the shadows on the wall, the quiet little tremble they made when the air conditioner kicked on, and I let myself feel the weight of everything. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even hurt in the usual sense. What I felt was a slow, quiet heartbreak. The kind that moves through you gently but deeply, like cold water seeping into your clothes. I thought about all the years I spent caring for her, tending to every scraped knee, every bad dream, every heartbreak. I remembered how many times she clung to me when she was little, afraid of thunderstorms or shadows in her room. I remembered whispering to her that she would never be too much for me. And now here I was, a 66-year-old woman afraid to ask her own child for help. I convinced myself she didn't mean what she said. I told myself she was just tired, just overwhelmed, just having a hard time. And maybe she was. But even when you forgive someone, the words stay. They settle inside you. They change the shape of things. And without knowing it, her words marked the first real break in something I thought was unbreakable. I didn't know then how far that break would spread. I didn't know it was the beginning of the unraveling. I didn't know that the child I once held so close would one day look at me not with love, but with calculation. But then again, I wasn't ready to see the truth yet. Not then. Not yet. The next part of my story begins with the moment everything shifted from uneasy distance to something far more painful. I remember the day so clearly because the sunlight coming through my window felt softer than usual, almost like it was trying to prepare me for something I wasn't ready to see. My knee had been acting up again, and I was sitting at the kitchen table stirring my tea when I heard my daughter's car pull up. She didn't call ahead. She didn't text. She just arrived, and something about that made my stomach tighten a little, though I didn't know why at the time. When she walked in, she had this smile. Bright, stretched, too quick. It reminded me of the smiles people put on right before they ask for something or deliver news they've already decided you should accept. Mom, she said, kissing my cheek like she hadn't rushed through our last 3 phone calls. We need to talk. Those 4 words never lead to anything simple. And the way she said them, not gentle, not warm, but rehearsed, made something cold settle in the back of my chest. I folded my hands on the table and tried to smile. All right, baby. What's on your mind? She sat across from me, smoothing out her blouse, glancing around the kitchen like she was evaluating things. I've been thinking a lot, she started, and her tone was almost professional. About your knee. About you living alone. About how hard it is for me to balance everything. I nodded slowly, even though the knot in my chest tightened with each word. And, she continued, reaching for my hand as if that would soften the blow she was about to deliver, I found a place that can help. My heart paused. A place? I asked carefully. What kind of place? A rehabilitation home, she said quickly. Too quickly. Just for a little while. Just until you get stronger. They'll help you recover, and it'll make everything easier for both of us. Those last words, for both of us, were spoken like she'd been practicing them. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she was thinking of my comfort, my safety, my healing. I wanted to believe that this was coming from love. But something inside me whispered, this isn't just about you. Still, I smiled and tried to keep my voice steady. Baby, I didn't know you were worried about me like that. She sighed, pressing her lips together. I am. I really am. I can't keep doing all this on my own, Mom. The way she said, I can't keep doing all this felt less like concern for me and more like frustration with me. But I swallowed that feeling because mothers do that. We smooth over the sharp edges for our children, even when those edges cut us. All right, I said softly. Maybe a short stay could help. She nodded quickly, too relieved, too ready. Great. They have an opening today. Today. Not tomorrow, not next week. Today. That told me everything I didn't want to know. But I didn't fight. I didn't question her timing or her urgency. I trusted my daughter, because trust is something you build over years, and I wasn't ready to see the cracks in ours. The facility was clean. Too clean. Everything smelled faintly of disinfectant and lavender, a combination that felt like it was trying too hard to be comforting. The floors were shiny, the walls painted in those pale greens and soft yellows that nursing homes always seem to choose. As we walked down the hallway, I noticed the eyes of the people sitting in wheelchairs or slow-stepping their way across the floor. Some looked tired. Some looked confused. Some stared off as if remembering a different version of their life. It wasn't a place filled with hope. It was a place filled with waiting. I tried to ignore the uneasiness twisting inside me. My daughter kept talking about the staff being professional, about the temporary nature of my stay, about how she'd visit all the time. Her words were bright, cheerful, practiced like a sales pitch. But when we reached the room they assigned me, a small, quiet space with 2 narrow beds and a window that looked out at the parking lot, I felt my breath catch. It wasn't a bad room, just lonely, sterile, a place where life felt paused. See, she said, clapping her hands lightly. It's nice. I nodded, feeling too old and too small all at once. When she helped me unpack a few clothes, she moved quickly, efficiently, like she was racing a clock. She didn't sit on the bed. She didn't ask how I felt. She didn't reach out for my hand again. She just worked. And then, almost as soon as she finished folding the last shirt into the drawer, she stood up and smoothed her coat. Well, she said brightly, I should get going. Already? Going? I repeated, blinking. So soon? She smiled, but her eyes were already somewhere else. I have a meeting, but I'll be back tomorrow, okay? And I'll call tonight. She leaned down, kissed my forehead lightly, almost like checking off a task, and then she was gone. Just like that. I sat on the edge of the bed long after the door closed, staring at the empty space beside me. The silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt abandoned. I kept telling myself it was just for a short while, that she would call in a few hours, that she meant what she said. But she didn't call that night. Not even once. The next morning, I waited by the window, watching for her car. I kept telling myself she was just running late, that traffic was bad, that she had meetings, that life was pulling at her in ways I couldn't understand. By noon, I stopped pretending. By evening, I knew something was wrong. When I asked one of the nurses if my daughter had called, she checked the messages. "No," she said calmly, "but we can try calling her for you." I shook my head. "No need. I don't want to bother her." But inside, something hurt in a way I hadn't felt since I was a young woman. Heart hurt, deep hurt, the kind that settles behind your ribs and stays there. On the third day, she finally called. Her voice was light, casual, like she was checking in on a coworker rather than her own mother. "Hey," she said. "Sorry, it's been crazy busy." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "It's all right, baby. I'm doing okay here." "That's good," she said quickly. "I'm glad it's working out. It's for the best." For the best. The phrase stung worse than the silence. I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, "And when will I be coming home?" There was a long pause. Not a thoughtful pause. A guilty one. "Well, I think you should stay a little longer. Maybe indefinitely." Indefinitely. That word didn't just hurt. It broke something inside me. "I thought this was temporary," I whispered. "It was," she said, her tone shifting into something harder. "But, Mom, be realistic. You can't live alone anymore. You need care. And I can't do everything." I pressed my palm against my knee to steady myself. "Baby, I wasn't asking you to do everything." "Well, that's how it feels," she snapped lightly. "Look, this place can give you what I can't. So can we just not make this harder than it already is?" My breath caught. Not make it harder? She wasn't trying to help me heal. She was trying to place me somewhere convenient. Somewhere out of the way. Somewhere she didn't have to think about me unless she chose to. I sat in silence for a moment, feeling the walls of that little room close in around me. "All right," I said softly. "If that's what you think is best." She exhaled, relieved. Relieved. "Good. I'll try to come by this weekend." She didn't. Not that weekend. Not the next. What she did instead was tell the facility administration she would no longer be my primary contact for day-to-day updates. They informed me gently, apologetically, but the message was clear. She had stepped back. She had already let me go. She had made her decision long before the day she brought me there. I had just been too hopeful, too trusting, too full of love to see it. The truth sank into me slowly, painfully, like cold water soaking into fabric. I wasn't in a rehabilitation home. I had been placed aside, put away, left. The ache in my knee was nothing compared to the ache in my heart. But I didn't cry. Not then. Not in that room with its sterile walls and humming fluorescent lights. Instead, I stared out the window at the empty parking lot and felt something shift inside me. Something quiet. Something strong. Something I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the moment I stopped waiting for someone else to save me. And the moment I started learning how to save myself. The days inside that place didn't begin so much as they drifted in, soft, slow, and quiet, like fog rolling across flat land. There was no real sunrise feeling, no sense of a new day starting. Just the same muted lights humming overhead and footsteps echoing down long, polished hallways that always smelled faintly of bleach and something floral. I used to think nursing homes were sad because of the people inside them. But living in one taught me it's the silence that gets you, the stillness that settles on your shoulders like a weight. My room felt too big in the mornings and too small at night. You'd think being surrounded by people would offer some comfort, But the truth is, loneliness takes up more space than any person can fill. Breakfast was the same every day: oatmeal, scrambled eggs, toast. They'd put me at a round table with 3 others. Most of them were sweet folks, but their eyes held stories I didn't want to fall into. Stories about families that stopped calling, children who never came back, lives that had slowly been packed away like old letters in a drawer. I wasn't ready to see myself in them. There was Mr. Harris, who'd stir his coffee for 10 minutes without taking a sip. Miss Gloria, whose daughter lived 20 minutes away, but hadn't visited in 6 years. And another woman, maybe in her 70s, who never spoke a word but always held tight to a folded napkin like it was the last thing she owned. We'd sit there every morning, listening to the clatter of trays and the TV playing news nobody cared about. And for a while I kept telling myself, this is temporary. My daughter will come for me. She promised. But promises mean nothing when they're made out of convenience. At first, my daughter called every couple of days, short calls, always rushed. Hey, Mom, you doing okay? Good. I can't talk long. I'm in the middle of something. That was her new phrase, in the middle of something. But after a week, the calls came slower. After 2, they came from her voicemail instead. After 3, well, I stopped keeping track. My hope had started marking time in different ways, like how often the nurses checked in, or how often I heard my name spoken out loud. One afternoon, while the other residents napped, I sat near a window watching the shadows lengthen across the lawn. I used to love shadows. They reminded me of summer evenings in my yard, watching my daughter chalk shapes on the driveway. But the shadows here were different. They felt long, stretched thin, tired. A young nurse named Olivia sat beside me. She was maybe 22, with soft brown eyes and a kindness that didn't feel like part of her job. She looked at me and said, "Has your daughter visited yet?" I shook my head gently. "Not yet." She frowned, but only a little. Nurses learn to hide the full truth behind half-expressions. "Some families take time," she said softly. "People get busy." People always say busy like it's a shield they can hide behind. "I know," I said quietly. "I'm trying to be patient." She placed her hand on mine for a moment, warm, soft, comforting. But then she had to move on, tending to the others. After she left, I sat there a long time staring out that window, and something in me shifted. Not enough to call it anger, not yet. Just a small ache that started in my chest and grew heavier with every hour she didn't come through that door. The saddest part wasn't the quiet or the routine, or even the looks from people who had accepted their fate long before I arrived. It was watching other families visit. Some came with balloons, cards, flowers. Others brought little things: chocolate, crossword puzzles, sweaters their loved ones didn't need, but appreciated anyway. I watched sons push wheelchairs around the courtyard, daughters braid their mother's hair, grandchildren sit on laps as if time hadn't stolen anything. I watched all of this, day after day, and each time the door swung open, a part of me hoped I'd see my daughter's face. But it never was. One Sunday afternoon, a gentle, warm day that made everything outside glow like honey, I watched a man kiss the top of his mother's head before helping her stand. She grinned, held onto his arm, and whispered something that made him smile. They walked slowly down the hallway together, and I had to look away because the sight of them felt like a bruise I wasn't ready to touch. It hurt because I remembered when my daughter did that for me, grabbed my arm, smiled at me, called me Mama with a softness I thought could never fade. I didn't realize how quiet her absence sounded until I heard someone else's joy. One morning, while I was getting dressed, the administrator knocked on my door. A middle-aged woman with clipped speech and a smile she wore like a uniform. "Ms. Robinson," she said, "we need to update your file. Your daughter filled out some new information." I sat on the edge of my bed, smoothing my pants over my knee. "What kind of information?" She glanced at her clipboard. "Address changes. Emergency contacts. Insurance details." I froze. "Address changes?" I repeated slowly. She nodded.
Yes.
She listed your home address as her residential address. My breath caught. My home. Yes, the administrator replied, adjusting her glasses. She wrote that she's living there temporarily. Temporarily. The same word she had used with me. Only now, it was wrapped around a truth she hadn't bothered to share. I stared straight ahead, trying to keep my voice calm. And she didn't mention this to you? Or anyone else? The administrator shook her head. She said you were aware. But I wasn't. I wasn't aware of anything. I wasn't aware that she'd already made space in her life by pushing me out of my own. I wasn't aware that she'd walked into my home, the one I worked decades to keep, and settled herself inside it like it was owed to her. I wasn't aware that all those rushed calls and clipped conversations were part of a plan she'd been building long before she brought me here. The administrator left the room, still wearing that polite, distant smile. But her words stayed behind, filling the space like unwelcome guests. My daughter had taken my home. She had stepped into it without hesitation. While I sat in this quiet facility, surrounded by people whose lives had been put away, she was sleeping in my bed, cooking in my kitchen, living under my roof. A part of me felt numb. Another part felt hollow. But beneath all that, something deeper stirred, something steady and rising, like the slow lift of a wave before it hits the shore. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was the first spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time: self-worth. The realization that my life wasn't hers to discard, that my home wasn't hers to claim, that my story didn't have to end in this quiet, forgotten place. As the day went on, that spark grew. It warmed me from the inside, spreading into my bones, into the parts of me that had felt weak and worn and dependent. I wasn't going to disappear behind these walls. I wasn't going to let her write me out of my own life. I wasn't ready to fight her yet. Not in the loud way. But something inside me whispered that my voice still mattered, even if she had tried to muffle it. That evening, as the sunset cast soft gold light through my window, I whispered to myself the words I had forgotten I still owned. This isn't where my story ends. And for the first time since entering that place, I felt the faintest, quietest hint of strength returning, tender, shaky, but real. Strength that would carry me into the next chapter of my life. Strength that would soon become the foundation of the quiet revenge she never saw coming. If someone had told me, months earlier, that strength could rise out of the same place where heartbreak lived, I wouldn't have believed them. But something inside me had shifted the moment I learned my daughter was living in my home without so much as a conversation. It was a quiet shift, a tightening, a settling, a sense of my own worth returning to me in small pieces. I didn't feel brave at first. I just felt awake. And being awake is its own kind of power. A week after that conversation with the administrator, a social worker named Claire stopped by my room. She was a soft-spoken woman with silver hair tied neatly at the back of her head, gentle eyes, and a clipboard always tucked under her arm like a shield. She sat across from me, nodded politely, and said, "I've been reviewing some of your paperwork, Ms. Robinson. I thought we should talk." Her voice wasn't rushed. It wasn't patronizing. It was steady, like someone opening a window in a stuffy room. I folded my hands in my lap. "What do we need to talk about?" She took a breath. "Your daughter listed herself as the primary decision-maker on your account. But according to your original documentation, you're still capable of making your own choices." I swallowed slowly. "So, she shouldn't have done that?" She shook her head gently. "Not without your consent. And not without legal authority." Her words settled between us, almost too heavy to think about. I looked away for a moment, out the window, where the faintest sunlight rested on the grass outside. I'd spent weeks feeling powerless, forgotten. But suddenly, the truth felt different, like a door quietly unlocking. Claire leaned forward just a bit. "Ms. Robinson, has your daughter told you about any plans involving your home?" I let out a tight, shaky breath. She moved into it without telling me. Claire nodded slowly, as if she'd heard stories like this before. I see. And have you signed anything recently? Any documents? Papers? No, I answered firmly. Nothing. She closed her eyes briefly, almost in relief. Good. That means you still hold full rights. And we can make sure it stays that way. Something warm rolled through my chest. Not quite courage, not quite anger. Maybe it was both, weaving together in a way that made me straighten up just a little more. What do I need to do? I asked. Claire smiled faintly. We'll take it one step at a time. The next few weeks didn't feel like a battle. They felt like rebuilding a house inside my heart brick by brick. Claire met with me regularly, explaining my rights, showing me how to request my own medical papers, how to update my emergency contacts, how to document everything from phone calls to timelines to even the smallest details. She had a calm, patient way of teaching, as though she understood I needed more than information. I needed to feel capable again. My body healed too. The physical therapist pushed me gently past my comfort zone, helping me stand a little straighter, walk a little further, rely a little less on the rails. My legs were shaky at first. My confidence was too. But each day I felt a bit more like the woman I had been before the pain started. Independent, resilient, steady. And every time I finished a good session, every time I walked a little farther down that hallway, I heard Claire's voice in my mind. You're not powerless, Ms. Robinson. You just forgot how much strength you carry. Outside of therapy, I spent hours going through what little I had with me, a small notebook, a few letters, my phone. I scrolled through old messages from my daughter, reread the ones that used to make me smile. Some were sweet, tender, full of love. But the most recent ones felt sharp, clipped, impatient. I started documenting everything, dates, times, what she said, what she didn't say. Not for revenge, not even for anger, but because Claire told me something I'll never forget. When someone takes advantage of your kindness, the best protection you have isn't yelling or fighting. It's clarity. Clarity. A word I hadn't felt in months. Then one morning, the phone rang at the front desk. A few minutes later, the administrator knocked on my door with her usual polite, polished expression. You have a visitor, she said. My heart sparked with a sudden, foolish hope. But when my daughter walked through the doorway, I felt that hope dissolve into something quieter, something steadier. She was dressed in expensive clothes, her hair styled, makeup done as if she were giving a presentation somewhere. Not a sign that she'd rushed, not a hint that she'd been worried. Hey, Mom, she said lightly, glancing around the room like she was inspecting a hotel. How are you feeling? I'm healing, I answered calmly. She sat down, crossing her legs, tapping her manicured nails on her phone. Good, good. Well, I came because there are some things we need to sort out. Papers to sign, decisions to make. It's easier if you just transfer the house to me now rather than later, when things get more complicated. The words were spoken casually, as if she expected no resistance, as if she had already moved the pieces on the board and assumed the game was hers. I didn't speak right away. I looked at her carefully. The daughter I'd loved more than anything, the child I'd carried, raised, protected. And for a moment, I saw something I'd been blind to, a woman who cared more about comfort than connection. I folded my hands together. Why do you need my house? She blinked. Mom, please. You're not living there anymore. You're here. And I need a place that feels stable. Besides, you'll be better staying in a facility permanently. They'll take care of you. Permanently? She said the word like she was gifting me something. I felt the air in the room get still, heavy. But instead of the old ache rising in me, the hurt, the confusion, I felt that new strength, quiet and anchored. I haven't signed anything, I said softly. She shrugged. Well, you will. It's what makes sense. I looked her straight in the eyes, my voice steady as a line drawn in sand. No, I won't. For the first time, her perfect expression cracked. Just a flicker. Confusion mixed with irritation. Mom, don't make this difficult. I'm not making anything difficult, I said gently. I'm just choosing what belongs to me. She stared at me as if she didn't recognize the woman sitting across from her. Maybe she didn't. Maybe she had gotten so used to me being small, tired, dependent, that she didn't know what to do when I lifted my chin and spoke like the woman who raised her. You don't understand how this works, she snapped. I do, I said, keeping my tone warm, calm. More than you think. She opened her mouth to argue, but I didn't let the argument rise. I simply said, Claire has been helping me. Her jaw tightened. Who? A social worker. She explained my rights. The frustration on her face deepened. You're being manipulated. I shook my head slowly, kindly. No. I'm being informed. Silence stretched between us. Thick, uneasy. Finally, she stood. You're making a mistake, she said sharply. And I can fix it before it gets worse. She walked out without waiting for a reply. Her heels clicked down the hallway like a rhythm of anger. I exhaled softly, feeling the weight of what had just happened. Not fear, not regret, just truth. Claire's voice echoed in my memory. Clarity is power. And I finally had it. 2 days later, Claire arranged a meeting with a legal advocate who specialized in elder rights. She walked me through everything: ownership documents, healthcare directives, my will, property records. Piece by piece, she helped me build something stronger than any argument my daughter could make. A wall of facts. A wall of legal truth. A wall that no amount of guilt or manipulation could tear down. With each paper I signed, each signature that confirmed I was still in control, I felt something inside me rising higher, like a tide reclaiming lost shore. Not anger, not revenge. Strength. Strength I thought I had lost somewhere between loneliness and heartbreak. Strength I didn't know was still living inside me. Strength that belonged to me, no matter who tried to strip it away. Every day after that, I walked a little farther, stood a little taller, spoke a little more firmly. Not loud, not aggressive, just certain. My daughter's attempts grew frantic, calls demanding updates, messages insisting she had legal plans, emails accusing me of betrayal. But each time, I responded calmly, courteously, with the support and documentation Claire helped me prepare. Her anger didn't shake me anymore. Her disappointment didn't cut me anymore. Her threats didn't scare me anymore. Because for the first time in a long, long while, I knew exactly who I was. And I knew exactly what I still deserved. The home I built, the life I earned, the dignity I carried. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. This was preparation, the quiet gathering of strength before stepping back into the world on my own terms. And that quiet strength would soon lead me straight into the final chapter of my life. The chapter where I finally, peacefully, claimed what was mine. The chapter where my quiet revenge would bloom. I still remember the morning I left that facility. Not because anything dramatic happened. There were no tears, no shouting, no grand speeches. It was quiet, smooth, almost gentle. The nurse handed me my discharge papers with a warm smile, and Claire gave me a soft hug, whispering, "You're stronger than you know." I carried those words with me like a small stone in my pocket, solid, grounding, familiar. A transportation van waited outside, and as the door opened, sunlight spilled across my lap. Real sunlight. Not the filtered kind that came through medical blinds. Not the artificial glow of hallway lamps. But the warm, open, honest light of a new beginning. I let it sit on my face for a moment before I said, almost to myself, "I'm going home." It felt strange, saying it out loud, like speaking to old bones that had been asleep too long. The ride itself wasn't long, 15 minutes, maybe 20, but my heart beat through every second. Not from fear. Not anymore. It was anticipation, the kind that comes when you know you're about to step back into a life that tried to slip away from you. When the van pulled up in front of my house, I just stared. Things were out of place. A few plants dead on the porch. A light still burned inside, even though it was morning. A stack of mail crowding the box, most of it with my name on it. But it was mine. Every board, every window, every crack in the walkway, all mine. I stepped out slowly, leaning on my cane, and the breeze carried a familiar scent: old magnolia trees, warm brick, and the faint memory of home. My home. For a moment, I stood there with my hand on the gate, letting the weight of everything settle. Months of confusion, hurt, abandonment. Learning my daughter was living here like it belonged to her. Realizing that the world I'd built hadn't vanished. It had simply been waiting for me to return to it. I wasn't angry. The anger had burned itself out weeks ago, replaced by something steadier, clearer. I wasn't here to fight. I was here to reclaim. I pushed open the front door, and the house greeted me with a silence thick enough to touch. A few suitcases were piled by the hallway. Hers, obviously. Shoes she never bothered to line up. Clothes draped across the banister. Evidence of a life lived without permission. I stood there in the doorway, breathing in slowly, until the smell of my own house, dust and lavender and a hint of lemon from the last cleaner I'd used, wrapped itself around me like a quilt. Then I got to work. Not with yelling. Not with confrontation. With a trash bag. I picked up the clothes first, folding none of them, just placing them neatly into the bag. I gathered shoes, makeup, hair products left on the counter. I collected the mail addressed to me and set it aside in a neat pile. And with each small task, something inside me untangled. My hands shook a little at first, but they grew steady. My breath deepened. My shoulders relaxed. The house that had felt stolen from me began taking shape again, quietly, simply, piece by piece. By the time her key turned in the door, I had 2 full bags of her belongings sitting by the steps. She walked in looking startled, almost offended, as if she couldn't imagine anyone rearranging the world she'd built for herself inside my walls. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. I turned to her calmly. "This is my home." She blinked at me, confused for a moment. Then her eyes narrowed. "I told you I needed more time. You weren't supposed to come yet." "I didn't agree to that," I replied softly. "I never did." Her jaw tightened, the way it always did when she felt control slipping through her fingers. "This isn't fair." A strange peace settled over me at that word. Fair. She'd used that word a lot when it came to her own preferences, what was fair to her, what was convenient for her, what made her life easier. But what about fairness to the woman who had raised her? What about fairness to a mother whose only wish had been to feel loved at the end of her life? "I think fairness looks different now," I said gently. She let out an irritated breath. "So what? You're kicking me out?" "No," I said, pointing to the bags. "Your things are packed. You can pick a time to come get the rest. But you won't be living here anymore. This is my space again." "And where am I supposed to go?" she shot back. I shrugged softly, not cruelly, just honestly. "You've been making decisions without me for a long time. I think you'll figure this out too." She stared at me like she was looking at a stranger. Maybe she was. Maybe she had forgotten that the woman she thought she could quietly erase had a spine, a mind, and a right to her own life. "You're choosing yourself over me," she whispered. I met her eyes. For the first time, yes. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just grabbed her keys and walked out, leaving the bags behind. The door closed harder than it needed to, but not enough to shake me. I leaned on the counter and let the silence settle. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't scared. I wasn't even heartbroken anymore. I was free. The next days were simple, almost beautiful in their ordinariness. I cleaned cabinets she never bothered to wipe. I washed sheets that didn't smell like me. I rearranged the living room back to how it felt before everything shifted. My chair by the window, my small radio on the side table, my favorite blanket folded neatly over the backrest. Then I turned my attention outside. The yard had always been my therapy, a place where I could lose myself in soil, sunshine, and the slow patience of growing things. I bought a few small pots of flowers from the corner store, marigolds, lavender, a couple of bright red geraniums. I planted them quietly, kneeling in the dirt, letting the earth stain my fingers. It felt like planting pieces of my identity back into the world, watering them with every slow, deliberate breath. Neighbors stopped by one at a time, soft knocks, warm smiles, gentle questions. People had noticed my daughter living here. They'd wondered why I disappeared. When they learned the truth, they didn't bring pity. They brought respect. "Glad to see you back, Miss Lorraine," old Mr. Carter said, leaning on his cane. "This street didn't feel the same without you." I smiled at him, not with pride but with peace. It feels good to be home. Eventually, my daughter returned, not with apologies, not with understanding, but with confusion. A kind of emotional disorientation, like she'd expected me to crumble without her approval. She stood on the porch, arms crossed. "So, what now?" I opened the door only halfway. A gentle boundary. A firm message. "What now," I said softly, "is that we talk like two adults. And I keep my space. And you keep yours." She rolled her eyes. "You're being dramatic." "No," I answered with a calm she couldn't shake. "I'm being clear." She looked past me into the house, noticing how clean everything looked. How bright. How mine. "This isn't what I wanted," she murmured. "I know," I said, "but it's what I need." And there it was, the truth she had avoided, the one I had finally learned to embrace. I didn't need her to choose me. I needed to choose myself. We spoke for a few minutes, polite, measured, distant. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg for closeness. I didn't cling to the idea of restoring something she had broken. Instead, I let her leave with the same slow steps she once used to walk away from me. The difference this time? I didn't follow. Weeks passed, and I settled into a life so gentle it almost surprised me. Mornings on my porch with hot tea. Evenings at the community center reading with the seniors. Small errands. Quiet afternoons. Friends stopping by with pie or soup or conversation. My house became a home again, not a place frozen in betrayal. My heart softened too, not toward her choices, but toward myself, toward the woman who had been abandoned and still found her way back to her own name. Some people think revenge has to be loud, explosive, sharp. Mine wasn't any of those things. My revenge lived in the way I walked through my home again without fear. In the way I could sleep at night without wondering what she might take next. In the way I planted flowers that bloomed for me and no one else. My revenge was reclaiming the life she tried to make smaller. My revenge was choosing a peace she didn't think I deserved. My revenge was the simple, quiet truth. I didn't need her to be whole. One evening, just as the sun slipped low on the horizon, I sat on my front porch with a blanket around my shoulders. The sky glowed soft orange, fading into pink, and the flowers I planted swayed gently in the late breeze. I closed my eyes and felt my own breath move in and out, steady, strong, mine. After everything, after every hurt, every abandonment, every moment of doubt, I had found my way back to myself, not through anger, not through vengeance, through choice, through courage, through peace. I sat there for a long time, letting the warmth of the evening settle deep in my bones, grateful in a way I couldn't have imagined months before. In that moment, I knew exactly what my life had become. A life I rebuilt with my own hands. A life I didn't have to ask permission to live. A life where choosing myself wasn't selfish, it was necessary. And as the sky darkened, the first star appeared above the rooftops. I whispered softly, "I made it back." And I truly had.